for everything. We good? Cool. So the sermon has started. So let's, I guess, start the sermon. So here's the deal. We've talked about this before, but since the beginning of the existence of human beings, right? Like as far as we can tell, people have always believed in God. Like it's like it's part of us. We always like it doesn't matter like whose worldview or perspective, if they're religious, not religious, whatever. Like you can just see like the oldest big structures that we have seen that are, and most ancient forefathers built were religious structures. They were temples. They were places of worship. Like we know that the oldest civilizations of people were people who were worshiping God. And for them, the way that they understood worshiping God it's exactly what we talked about last week when we talked about the story of Cain and Abel, like the oldest story in the Bible that's about like the world that we live in. If you guys remember last week, Cain and Abel are these two guys, and both of them decide that they are going to offer a sacrifice to God. But if you look at the story carefully, God never told them to do that. They just kind of made that up on their own. They just, for them, it was just sort of the concept of, I need to give God something. I need to offer God a sacrifice. I need to give God a gift. I need to serve God in this way. It just kind of came out of them. And that's the way it's always been. Like, that's the way for in the ancient world, that's the way in ancient cultures, that's kind of what we see, is that ancient people saw God or the gods, or however they worded it, however they understood the divine to be. They always looked at it as, okay, there are these beings, or there are this being, and there is this being, and that God or those gods might be angry. They might be holding something back. They might not be blessing me in one way or the other. I might offend them. I may whatever. So I will serve that God, and in return, I will be blessed. That's the relationship for ancient people, and also for religion throughout the ages, and also for a lot of people today. The idea is that if we say the right words, if we do the right things, if we believe the right ideas, if we offer the right sacrifices, that the gods will no longer be angry, that God will bless us, however you want to word it, and that's the relationship that we gain through giving to God, that we gain through serving God. That's the way it's always been, and that's the way it is for so many folks. The thing about it, though, is as Christians, if we approach our faith like that, it's important that we understand that if that's the way our faith is, that we're doing it exactly the opposite of what Jesus did. Jesus, in fact, took that entire concept and flipped it exactly around. And it's not that we serve God in order that we might be blessed, but it is, in fact, that we are blessed because God serves us. That's a big claim. I'm going to have to back it up. So let's tell a story. One day, Jesus was with his mom and his earliest disciples. This was at a point in time in his life when he had people following him, that he had been teaching, he had been doing, Jesus stuff, but he hadn't really caught on yet. Right? Like this, it's like his early work. This is his debut album, his first couple albums before he really got to have a hit on the radio. And so Jesus has disciples, he has friends, and his mom is with him, and his mom says, hey, look, we've been invited to this wedding. Let's go to this wedding in a place called Cana. And Jesus and his disciples and his mom, they all go to this wedding. And as the story goes, the wedding is basically, it's a wedding. Like, you guys have been to weddings. Look, maybe I'm jaded because I do a million of them as a preacher, but they're all the same. Like every bride is like, I want to do it so differently. I know. I've done some of y'all's weddings, so I shouldn't say these things, but they're all the same, right? They just are. So the preacher talks too long and he tells jokes nobody laughs at, and then it's all cute, and then somebody cries, and then you go have cake and you smash in each other's faces, and there's terrible dancing, and your aunt is out there and you're like, somebody get my aunt, please. I don't know what she's doing out there, but it's inappropriate. And so then you go get your aunt, and that's just the way weddings are, right? And so the wedding is that way. It's just completely normal. Mary and Jesus and his disciples, they're there, and they're enjoying, and they're living their life, and it is what it is. And then they all run out of wine. And the thing that we have to understand about this is that their weddings were not like our weddings, and so we always have to make these explanations as to why that's such a big deal. Like today, if you have a wedding and you run out of booze, chances are good you've got a problem on your hands. That problem is named Kyle. He's drank all of it before 9 o'clock. Might also be Chad. I don't know. But it's definitely a Kyle or a Chad who got rid of all of your alcohol way before they were supposed to, right? That's the problem with running out of booze at the wedding today. But back then, we have to understand that they just lived a different world, in a different world. They had a different culture, they had a different mindset, and they had different cultural practices around marriages and things like that. So for them, as you may have heard from a different sermon, or maybe just let's all remind ourselves of the ancient world. Wedding ceremonies happened, and then the reception that for us, I always think goes way too long. They had it for like a week. It was like 7 days of a party. It was 7 days of drinking and dancing and eating and just having the best time. And it wasn't just like back then. You wouldn't just invite your friends. You wouldn't just invite your family. You wouldn't just invite like your extended family. You would invite everybody. And this makes sense, right? Because like the ancient world was boring. Like they don't have TV, they don't have movies, they don't have like supercomputers in their pockets that they can do anything with. Like the ancient world, they kind of have to make up their own ways of entertaining themselves. And so it just sort of makes sense they would have this thing where they'd say, look, if somebody in the community gets married, let's party for a week. What else we got going? Like we'll all just take out the week off work and we'll all just go do this and it'll be great. And you're thinking, well, that's very expensive. And you're correct. Like we spend way too much on weddings now, but they spent way too much on weddings back then. The idea, though, was kind of this. It was kind of an exchange. It was sort of a transaction. See, what would happen was up front, the couple, the family, whoever was getting married, they would throw this huge party, right, with all the food and all the wine and all of the everything, right, just this huge party. And in return, everybody knew the score, right? They're just starting out. They're young. They don't know. They don't have anything built up. So everybody would make sure they got paid back and then some. It's kind of like people often give you gifts and like here's a toaster. Well, back then they just gave you like wads of cash, like thank you for the great party. Here you go. And the way ancient weddings would work is you have like a 7-day party. You put up the money up front. You put up the everything. You throw the party. And then when the party's over, you'd be, the gift table would have all the money you spent plus a nice little nest egg to start with. And it's this beautiful, communal, just it's this incredible practice that the people in the ancient world, and particularly in ancient Israel, had. So now let's put this back. Let's reframe this. This wedding's going to last like a week. Jesus is not there just for a day, right? And this is going to be taking time out of his ministry to spend all this time with all of these people. And the way it was supposed to work is everything was supposed to last for that full week. And in return, everybody was going to give gifts, and everybody was going to give, just money, so that way they could start over and they could do all the things, and they could have the beginning of their life. All that works so long as both sides uphold their end of the bargain, however. And if you run out of wine, if you're halfway through this party, if you're halfway through this week, you're running out of wine, what you've done is not your part. In fact, you've insulted all these people that you brought. You've told them that their time, this thing they look forward to, this thing the whole community loves to do together, is not important. You're telling them that their needs are not important. And what they're going to tell you in return is that your needs are not important. And suddenly, there's this very real danger. If you throw this wedding and there is no wine, there's a very real danger that on the back end of it, you don't get, paid back. You don't get the nest egg, and this whole event becomes a disaster. Sometimes we talk about this like it's embarrassment, and I'm sure it would be embarrassing for this to happen to you, but this is a very real financial cost also. This is the beginning of your life together as a married couple going off the rails before it even starts. And so Mary finds this out. She finds out before Jesus does. Women talk. That's not sexism. Women do talk, okay? Anyway, sometimes you say things and you realize like that can be no, women talk, men talk too. It doesn't matter. Okay. So Mary's talking and she finds it out. And she goes straight to Jesus and she's like, hey, look, here's the situation. I'm going to need you to fix this for these people. I know you can. Like, I talked to that angel 30 years ago. Like, I am aware of your powers. I do not call in favors, okay? But I am calling in a favor now. You need to fix this. And Jesus tells her no, which is, I always love that part of the story. He's just like, no, I'm good. We don't need to do that. And it makes sense because Jesus is aware. By the way, Jesus knows that the second he starts, being public, the second he starts doing, his miracles, doing things, like it's a miracle that gets him killed, right? The book of John tells us that he performs the wrong miracle for the wrong guy. He raises Lazarus from the dead, and that's what gets him killed. Like that's the straw that breaks the camel's back. Miracles for Jesus are incredible and beautiful and kind and generous and lovely and wonderful and massively dangerous. Because if you anger the wrong person, your ministry is over before it even begins. And so Jesus, he's like, if you're Jesus, you're thinking like, do I really, like the whole town is here, right? Like everybody, do I really want to, to start this road of miracles by fixing the fact that somebody just did math wrong? Like you thought you needed, X wine and you actually needed Y. Like, is that really what I'm going to do? And so he tells Mary no. And Mary, being a helicopter parent, to her 30-year-old, says, I'm not going to listen to that at all. She goes and gets some guys, the servants who serve the wine, and says, here, this is Jesus. He's going to fix this. Just listen to him. And then she's like, okay, fine, I'll fix it. And he finds that this place there, it's like you get the impression that like this fancy place that we have weddings in churches often. This was a religious place. It was like the synagogue where they were, and so there were these huge barrels of where you could get like 20 to 30 gallons of liquid in there. They were actually built. They would have like ceremonial washings, not super unlike our baptisms. And so like they'd fill them with water, and then you dump them out, and then you'd have like a whole bath, and you could do the washing, and then that's just how they did it. So there's 6 of these things. So we're going to split the difference, and we're going to call it 150 gallons of water are in these things. And Jesus just, I don't know, however Jesus does stuff, he just like snaps his finger and like he turns 150 gallons of water into 150 gallons of wine. Wine, which by the way, even the like mostly drunk people could notice tasted just delicious. And that's the first miracle. Like that's the first miracle Jesus ever does in public. It's a whole thing. Everybody loves it. They're all pretty excited because we get to drink for the rest of the week, and it's great. And I like this story. And I really do. Like, it's a good story, and we could have told more jokes. And I love stories you can just randomly tell, throw jokes in with, and it's good. But there's a piece of this story that bothers me. And it's not really the story, but it's John. This is in the book of John. John, the way that John describes this story, it's really interesting to me. And by interesting, I mean it bothers me a little bit. This is what we read in John chapter 2, verse 11. About this story. It says, this miraculous sign at Cana in Galilee was the first time Jesus revealed his glory, and the disciples believed in him. There's something about that phrasing that irks me, if I'm being really honest. Like, there's something that in my brain, in my heart, in my soul, like we just sang a couple songs this morning that referenced glory. And we're talking about like the amazing things, like God's a wonderful maker, and God creates and he does all these incredible, huge, massive things, right? We think about glory, we think about how massive and powerful Jesus is, which makes sense because Jesus is God in the flesh, right? God becomes a person, his name is Jesus. And what that means is that when you see Jesus, right, you are seeing the creator of the universe. This is well laid out in the New Testament. That Jesus, as the Word of God, is the one who made all things. And when we think about that, we think about what God's glory might be. Like, for example, like Jesus made the universe. That's large. A lot to it. Jesus also didn't just like make the thing. He made the ways in which the thing operated, which means like Jesus created, gravity and space, vacuums. I don't know how space exactly works. He made stars. He made things that he made the concept of orbiting around each other. He made stars. He made solar systems. He made galaxies. He makes all the stuff that flies around. We know there's like black holes and we have no idea what they are. Whatever they are, Jesus made them. But then he made like this planet. He made life. He made people. He made you. He made me. He made the concept of people. And he made us with consciousness, right? Like we are able to grasp what's going on around us. And everything we grasp that's going on around us is a thing that Jesus made. Your ability to think is something Jesus made. Your ability to see, to hear, to smell, to taste, to touch, all of that is stuff Jesus made. Like when we look at what it means for God to be the creator, for Jesus to be God, every part of this. So now let's talk about this miracle, right? Water to wine. That's just chemistry. Jesus made up chemistry. So, like, he could just do that. That's no problem. Like, that's not a good miracle. That's not, like, a glorious miracle. That's just rearranging stuff. It's like rearranging Legos for him. Except he also made the Legos. And he never steps on them because, he always knows where they're at. Right? So, that's it this whole idea, like Jesus made the dirt, right? That the vine which he made comes out of the ground and the grapes grow on that. He made like the cells that make the grape. He made the DNA that makes the grape. Like he made all of that. He made the concept of fermentation. Puts all that in there. And of course, I don't just mean like he put a finger there. Like, I don't know how God makes stuff. Like, I'm a person and I'm kind of an idiot. I have no idea how God does this. But the idea is that all of these ways that God makes and creates, it's all there. And turning water to wine is literally nothing. It's just nothing. I mean, that reflects God's glory the way like Julia Child making a bologna sandwich reflects her glory. Or like Houdini does card tricks at a 7th grader's birthday party, and you're like, oh, greatest magician ever. No, they're card tricks. Okay, like he just shuffled them. It's like Abraham Lincoln making peace between two neighbors in an HOA. That's my favorite joke ever. Nobody else liked it. It's fine. You'll think about that one later. It'll be halftime of the Super Bowl. You'll be like, that's what he meant. That is clever. The point is, like, when you're capable of all the stuff and then you do a little dumb thing, well, that's not impressive. That's not, like, your glory. When I think about Jesus and his glory, I think about God's glory. I think about, like, you made the universe, not you rearrange some atoms, some molecules, right? Like, and yet John says this is how he shows his glory for the first time. The funny thing, though, is like with all of the miracles of Jesus, it's kind of like this, right? Like if you make the universe, if you made everything, if that's what you did, well, what's a guy with leprosy? What's a guy who can't walk? A lame man who now can walk. What's a blind guy? Right? There's a story in the Bible, and I'm sure there's a translation thing, but it always cracks me up because like there's a man with a withered hand. And I'm not trying to like belittle this man's pain. Maybe it was terrible, but like, really? You got a small hand? And you're asking for a miracle? Like, I don't know, get back to the line. There's like dead people and stuff. Like, the point is, when we really take a step back and we think about what it means that we see God's glory in these miracles, for the creator of all things, including reality itself, none of these miracles are overly impressive. So the question is, perhaps, might there be a different way of looking at the glory of Jesus? Is there something else potentially that John was looking at when he says he showed his glory? And sure enough, I think there's an answer to that. And to see it, we need to talk about John the Baptist. You know John the Baptist, forerunner of Jesus, cousin, guy who baptized everybody, has his whole ministry with Jesus. Like it dovetails with Jesus, but it's also separate. We've talked about all this. So John the Baptist, he didn't care. Like, he's just one of those guys that he just didn't care about upsetting people. So John the Baptist, one day he goes to Herod, the king, and he criticizes Herod's wife. Last thing you want to do is ever criticize a man's wife, especially a king who can just have you killed at any point. But John the Baptist didn't care because, like, the king had taken somebody else's wife, and that was starting a war, and lots of people were going to die because this guy decided he was going to do this thing, and John was just like, that's crazy, like, it's horrible, it's immoral, but also people are going to die, you have to stop. And Herod, for his sake, actually liked John the Baptist and didn't even super disagree with John. He's like, no, you're right, but I'm the king, so I'm going to. And that's how kings work. And so all that's going to be fine. Herod and John are basically friends, but Herod's wife did not like being criticized. So she had his head cut off and put on a platter. This is how John the Baptist ends. So he gets arrested, and while he still has his head, he's arrested. And John realizes, I'm going to be killed. This is it. I've angered the wrong person. This is what life is. Okay. And he's kind of self-reflective. He's had this whole ministry where he's been telling people that Jesus is the Messiah. He's the one that God had, prophesied would come save people, right? Like, he's been telling people that Jesus is the Messiah. And now he's having his doubts because, he's going to die. And this is what happens when we're faced with our own mortalities. We want to question and make sure that, what we believe is the right thing. So John sends to Jesus some messengers and asks Jesus, just point blank, are you in fact that guy? And this is what we read in the story, Matthew chapter 11. We read this. It says, John the Baptist, who was in prison, heard about all the things the Messiah, Jesus, was doing. So he sent his disciples to ask Jesus, are you the Messiah we've been expecting? Or should we keep looking for someone else? Jesus told them, go back to John and tell him what you have heard and seen. The blind see, the lame walk. Those with leprosy are cured. The deaf hear, and the dead are raised to life. The good news is being preached to the poor. And he added, God blesses those who do not fall away because of me. I think sometimes we, as Christians, we read the Bible and things happen and it's very easy to gloss over things because we're used to certain things. And I think this is one of those cases where we miss something subtle that's actually at the core of this message here. You see, Jesus does not tell John's disciples, I cured people of leprosy. He doesn't. He doesn't say, I made deaf people hear, or I raised dead people from, back to life. Jesus actually doesn't say I anywhere. At no point in this answer, which is about him, does Jesus talk about him. And that would be strange if it wasn't strange. Like, if it was strange. Like, that would be strange for me. If you came to me and were like, hey, what do are you the preacher of Ashland Christian Church? I'd be like, yeah, here's all the things I do. That would be a normal way for me to answer, right? But the way Jesus answers this question is the normal way for him to answer, which is entirely to put the focus on good things happening to other people and not putting the focus or the spotlight on himself at all. Jesus puts the entire attention on the good things that are happening to people who need good things to happen for them. And he completely steps aside. In other words, when Jesus answers John the Baptist, he does so with complete humility, without promoting himself even a little bit, simply reporting how human people who desperately need served have been served by his ministry. And I use that phrase liberally. right? Like I use that phrase specifically. He said one day Jesus is talking to his disciples, and they're arguing about who the best one is, and Jesus is like, hey, guys, I came as a servant to serve other people. And he tells them, if you guys want to be good, if you guys want to be great, you need to serve other people. A servant or a slave is someone who does things for the other, not themselves. And so when Jesus is trying to report to John the Baptist, hey, this is what it means to be the Messiah. This is, if you want to know if I'm the Messiah, let me just tell you, these people are being served, and it has not one thing to do with what's good for me at all. That's how he answers the question. That the Messiah, by definition, is one who serves. Which is to say, if that's Jesus, then God as a person is by definition one who serves. Okay, I've spoken a bit in riddles here, so let's actually not do the riddle thing. This is what the Apostle Paul says in the book of Philippians, chapter 2. He says, you must have the same attitude that Christ Jesus had. Though he was God, he did not think of equality with God as something to cling to. Instead, he gave up his divine privileges. He took the humble position of a slave and was born as a human being. When he appeared in human form, he humbled himself in obedience to God and died a criminal's death on a cross. Therefore, God elevated him to the place of highest honor and gave him the name above all other names. The name of Jesus, every knee should bow in heaven and on earth and under the earth, and every tongue declare that Jesus Christ is Lord, to the glory of God the Father. There's that word, glory. What it means to have glory. What is Jesus' glory? Well, God gives him the highest name, a name that everyone, everywhere, in every realm of existence knows and bows to, because he is God and he is, in fact, the creator of all things. But it's not because he made a bunch of stuff. It's not even because, it's not that he's the creator. It's not that he's got power. It's not that he's got these cool miracles. He can do all sorts of cool stuff. The reason Paul says that Jesus is worthy of being worshiped, he's worthy of glory, is because he gave up everything that made him God. He lived a life as a servant, as a slave. He died as something he wasn't, as a criminal. And all of that was to fulfill the deepest needs of human people who desperately needed help. The reason we worship Jesus is because he doesn't demand it from us. Right? Like, the reason Jesus is worthy of worship is because he never makes it about him. This is great irony. That thing we talked about at the beginning, that the religious people, ancient people, they did all these things in order to make God happy. They served the gods to try to make sure everything was okay. That's not Jesus. Jesus is God in the flesh who says, guys, everything is okay, and let me show you just how okay. Let me come and serve you. And because he was willing to do that, because he does serve us, that is why we should follow him and trust him and love him. That is why we are Christians. Not to get stuff out of, manipulating God in some sense, but instead because we've already gotten the deepest felt needs that we've already always had. And you see that in Jesus' ministry. Why is the turning water to wine such a big miracle? Well, it's not. That's not a big miracle at all. It's not impressive. That's a parlor trick, guys. But you know who it's big to? The couple who needed the wine. You know who else is big to? Whoever it was between the couple or in their family that did that math wrong and didn't get that wine all the way covered. That dude definitely needed this miracle. And yes, maybe that's sexism. It was definitely a dude. That guy definitely needed it, right? And it's a dumb miracle, but not to them. The creator of gravity and orbits and stars and planets and wormholes helps a guy who can't see. That's nothing. It's a parlor trick. Rearranging a couple of things. But to the guy who can't see, who now can, it's everything. You see, God serves us by coming on to our world, coming down to our level, and giving us the things that we need. That is how he expresses his love. It's not about power. It's not about grandeur. It's about we have needs, and he loves us enough to meet them. This morning, we're in our last week of our series called God's Love Language. First 5 weeks of the year, we've been talking about this concept that people feel love differently. People feel God differently because God is love. And there's all sorts of ways. There's this book that I never read because, felt like homework, so I didn't. But there's this book, and there's these 5 love languages, right? I would try to go through them all, but I always forget one. Let's see if I can get them. So we got physical touch. We've got words of affirmation. We've got quality time. We've got the one we're doing. And we got something else. I don't know. We got something else. I always forget one. Words of affirmation. There we go. Yeah, I always forget one. Yeah, there it is. And in all the ways that God has made us to experience love, that is all the ways in which God has shown us love. And this morning, as we talk about acts of service, we understand that the way that God has shown us love most dramatically, the way that we can see God's glory in Christ, is to see the way in which he serves us at our level. Our 5th and final lesson from God's love language is this: Christ's glory is shown by the fact that he became a man specifically to serve us in love. Christ's glory is shown by the fact that he became a man specifically to serve us in love. We're going to sing a song. David, we're going to sing a song. We offer invitation each and every week. Basically, look, if you want to become a Christian, you should get baptized and repent and do the stuff. And if you want to talk about that, we should talk about that. If you're already a Christian and you're like, hey, I should join this church, cool. We should talk about that too. So if you need to talk, let's talk. And in the meantime, let's sing a song and let's understand just how much God loves us, just how much God serves us. And as Paul said, let that be our attitude in this world as well. As we stand.